Hi everyone. Yeah, going to talk about how to get nice lines in your work. This is a video that I've actually avoided doing because it's what I would call an advanced technique, and it's something that you use to finish up a drawing. And the reason why I've avoided doing it or doing a video on this is because I was worried that people are going to be doing this up before they master doing a decent sketch, doing normal form drawing, and rushing ahead to this stuff when they're not ready for it, and basically making um, the making all the amateurish drawings that you see out there, all the ones that have the really, you can tell that the person tried really hard to make nice lines, and their perspective is all, and their anatomy is all, and that's what makes an amateur is that the amateur is someone who tries to do advanced techniques without a solid foundation. That's what makes you look like a noob. That is the mark. That is the dead giveaway that you're a noob, that you're not professional. Is that you try to show that you have advanced techniques. You're using airbrush tools. You're using, you're trying to do nice painting and all that, but your form and your anatomy and your perspective suck. Your composition suck. Okay, so foundational stuff is always going to be more important. All right, so when it comes down to getting nice lines, well, nice lines are going to require stabilization. If you're working digitally, you're going to need a stabilizer. So what I mean by this is that without a stabilizer, no matter how I move, it's going to make, it's going to move very, very, very fast. And if I move really, really slowly, so here, I'm going to zoom out for a bit, and I'll move really, really slowly. Okay, and now, whoops, oh yeah, I have to draw while zoomed out, just so that it's going to magnify my the imperfections in the line. So I'm going to move really, really slowly here while zoomed out. So if I zoom in, now you can see that there's these wibbly wobblies in the line. There's these little cracks and lumps in the line. Now, if on the other hand, I zoom out and I apply a stabilizer, so hang on, we gotta, okay. We zoom in on that. Now you can see that it has substantially removed some of the wibbly wobblies. And if I go into this thing here, this is the software I'm using is TV Paint, and I use their built-in smoothing as opposed to my Wacom driver hack. You can see that it's got this pulled string that you can use. So the thing is, it's pretty cool, right? Like stabilization does some averaging, and it really, really gives you, that tight control over the line, and without getting the wibbly wobblies. So you have different modes here in TV Paint. There's the average mode. So this is just taking an average of my brush strokes. Personally, I think I like the pulled string mode a little bit more. I find it easier to control or more predictable. So that's TV Paint. TV Paint, on the other hand, is often prohibitively expensive for most amateurs. It's like $1,500, I think, if you're going full on production mode. Like, the thing is for 2D bitmap based animation. It's something that I can. Oh, right, I've got my line smoother in there. That's why. Right, so I mean, it's something which can use really, really big brushes and paint with a lot of pixels all at once. It's bitmap based, so I can. It's not like, say, Toon Boom, right? In this case, I can use some pretty funky brushes, so it's really good for doing hair, that kind of thing, and it's good for animation. So that's a 1, that's a 2, that's 3. I'm just adding frames, and then I can flip through these really, really fast, and it's 1728 by 1080, right? Like, it's a pretty big image. So that's why I like using TV Paint. It's just the fastest, the most efficient, and it allows for deep customization. It is, to me, what I would consider it to be like it's the equivalent of like a contractor's jackhammer, right? You can get the crappy consumer's motorized screwdriver, or you can get the contractor's concrete drill. That's what this thing is. This thing is a business tool. It's a production tool for getting shit done. It's not a toy. That's why it's so expensive, and I think it's really, really well made. But it is also prohibitively expensive for most people. So the alternatives are Lazy Nezumi Pro. I list this one off because it's the most inexpensive of all the methods that I know of to get stabilization into any piece of software that you use. So that would include things like Photoshop. And I don't know if it will work with MS Paint, but I think as long as it works with as long as it uses the Wacom driver, then you'll be good to go. So this is something which is an add-on. And then you also have the option of something like Paint Tool Sai, which is $47. So instead of $35, $47. And it also has a built-in stabilizer. And it's very customizable. There's many different ways in which you can set up the stabilization. And it's another program which is pretty good. Quite popular. And is cheaper than buying Photoshop. So, and then there's the TV Paint, which is, $1,000 plus. So that is this is what I feel is the most flexible of them all. But it's what I would use if I was working a high throughput company which was doing lots and lots of animation, and you're just plowing through tons of work. So that's what I feel. I think it's really, really well made software, but like I say, it's it comes at quite a price. So yeah, getting the nice lines. So if you're working with your sketch, let me just get a quick sketch going here. And okay. You can see the use of all those donut exercises coming into play here. Okay, I think that's enough. This is enough for us to work with. So, a few key things. Number one, before you even use any stabilization, it's really important how you set up your workspace in your tablet. So I'm working with this non-photo blue, and the non-photo blue in TV Paint allows me to add black lines on top. And if I want, I can eliminate the blue paint. It just goes away. It's like working with traditional animation. So yes, I do work with a sketch. I tend to like to tint it using non-photo blue, or work on it on a separate layer. And then I also do a knockback. So a knockback will take the opacity and it will turn down the opacity by 50%. So I'll show that to you without the camera mode. So if I knock it back, this is what it does. It knocks it back like that. For those of you who have wondered for what the Colonel Sanders KFC button is, that is the KFC double down button. So every time I click this and paint on it, you can see that it will double up the opacity of any line that I draw. So the purpose of this line is to double down the opacity of the line and to bring it back. But that's why Colonel Sanders exists on my hotbar. So right, so your number one, make sure that your sketch is pretty faint, and you don't need really, really, really I like to keep things still pretty loose, because when I ink, I want to be able to adjust things. So the important thing is that your rough is not super duper duper clean. This is pretty important, because otherwise what happens is if your drawing is too clean, then you tend to zoom in and try to trace things. Inking is not tracing. It's not tracing, because there are further adjustments that you make while you're inking. So as you can see, I'm rotating this thing because my arm likes to draw like that. It doesn't like to make these kinds of movements. It always feels, this is like a very, very difficult angle for me to deal with. Then also anchoring here and pivoting like this is another maneuver that I do. So there's really just a few basic maneuvers. There's the wrist pivot, which is just right here on the base of my hand. There's like a little bone spur. So I either anchor and pivot on that, or what I do is I have an elbow. So here, let me just turn this over here, and show you on the desk camera again. So we've got the bone spur wrist pivot like that. We have the elbow pivot, which is like so. Okay. I don't do this. The reason why is because the pen angle starts to change. So if you're using any brushes which use pen angle and tilt, this will throw them off. Plus, it's not very good for drawing circles, and the many joints and articulations tend to make lumpy shapes, which is not what we want when we make nice lines. So that, then there's the elbow, and finally there's the whole shoulder. And the shoulder movement allows for the greatest amount of motion, albeit with the least amount of control. It does take away some degree of control. So every time I draw a line, get that back here. If you look at this curve, right, if I'm trying to draw that curve, what I do is I will zoom in the drawing and nail that curve like that, right? If I wanted to draw this particular curve, you'll see how I rotate it, right? There is a particular sweet spot on the tablet. This is probably this zone right here. This area here is the sweet spot. So a lot of times I'm just moving the line that I want to work on into the sweet spot. This is different from when I sketch, because when I sketch, I don't zoom in because I want the overall, I want to see the overall image. So anytime you're doing any kind of line work, you're often going to be rotating the thing into the sweet spot. Or you know, in this case, I'm going to do this whole line here. You can see that was a comment. That was like, that was a shoulder movement. And then the other thing I do is I often do double lines. So the reason why I do double lines is because if I just, the brush I'm using does not use pressure. I don't like pressure-based brushes for, like pressure thickness-based brushes, for the reason that you have to press harder to make the line thicker. By using a brush that always has a uniform thickness, right, I can adjust the thickness like that. I don't have to worry about, you know, increasing or decreasing pressure to get more or less thickness. And I find that the harder you press on the screen, the more the pen tends to want to wander, and you lose accuracy as a result. So very often I do this. I draw using double lines, and by using double lines, I can vary the thickness of the line like this. I can, you know, now my line has two contours. My line has an outer contour and also has an inner contour, right? I actually get to really control. It's not just about line thickness, it's where those undulations occur. So I'm just going to nail through these pretty quickly. I get that to, oh, here we are. I'm going to flatten out, purposefully flattening out this part here, because this is where it contacts the ground. It's an elliptical contact point, or circular, but turned in perspective with the ground. There's the double line again. Not much to it. Don't need any rulers or French curves, just stabilizers usually enough for me. And if I need the line to be thicker, I'll build it up with multiple brush strokes. There's another way in which you can do this, and that is if you're using traditional media like fountain pens and whatnot, right, which don't have any line weights, then this is how I build it up. I'll use multiple lines. So this also makes for a really nice line, and this is a nice alternative. If you don't have access to a stabilizer, then you can use this method, and it has a nice traditional look to it, because this is generally how you work a pen traditionally. And if you find that you can't make a line that goes really long, then don't. Just don't Don't try to make your line go. So I've turned off the stabilizer. Right, and just do it in pieces. Don't try to make lines that go any longer than what you can comfortably manage. So in this case, if it starts to feel weird, then just, rotate your canvas until it does feel comfortable, and then just nail the area. So in this case, I'm using, these are just bone spur wrist turns. I'm just using the bone spur on my hand to anchor. And then turning over. Now, when it comes to the thickness of a line, I will tend to make lines that, whenever a form comes closer to me, I tend to like making its lines thicker. So, this case, because the foot is closer. Oh, I'm still using the, I'm not using the stabilizer in this case. All right, I will make the line here thicker. And you can always go in after the fact and you can fill in. This is the time-consuming part. You can go with a lasso tool and, rapidly fill that in as well. But sometimes I actually like to leave the gap though. I find, I don't know, just personal preference. And yeah, that's pretty much how you get the nice lines down. It's that it's a really simple process, and you can use a stabilizer or not, and you just have to just be consistent. I'm going to thicken up these lines just because they're closer. Right, I'm going to give the most thickness to this part because it's the closest part of the drawing. And after every few lines, I always stop and I zoom out and I look at the overall picture, right? Defocus my eyes just briefly, and kind of figure, oh, I think this line could be thicker, that line could be that thicker. Like, you're tuning. You have to go through and slowly tune the drawing. You have to tune it to your liking. That's why I say it's not just about tracing. If you're tracing, you're not tuning. You're not really thinking about, how the drawing feels. Okay, so stabilizer would let me get really, really long strokes like that off. But you get the idea. It's yeah, not difficult at all. It's just takes time consuming, and all the same, you still have to use whole arm movements if you're using a stabilizer. And if you don't want to use a stabilizer, then you use smaller motions. You just have to zoom in and build up the line with little pieces. But you must have an underdrawing. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's all there is to getting nice line work.